I woke up about 3 in the morning, and I thought, we're getting mortared, and my mom and dad are here. And I ran across the compound yelling, "Mother." Mm-hmm. And somebody was awake to hear it because I got into my hooch, and I shook my mom and dad. "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And they said, "Yes, God damn it, go to bed." So that story is still being told by my friends at various places.
These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. For those of you out there that are truck guys like me, I want to talk to you about one of our newest sponsors, Decked. If you don't know Decked, they make bomb-proof drawer systems to keep your gear organized and safely locked away in the back of your truck. Clothes, rifles, packs, kill kits can all get organized and at the ready so you don't get to your hunting spot and waste time trying to find stuff. We all know that guy. Don't be that guy. They also have a line of storage cases that fit perfectly in the drawers. We use them for organizing ammunition, knives, glassing equipment, extra clothing, and camping stuff. You can get a 2-drawer system for all dimensions of full-size truck beds, or a single drawer system that fits mid-size truck beds. And, maybe best of all, they're all made in the USA. So, get decked and get after it. Check them out at decked.com. Shipping is always free. All right, gentlemen, we're sitting here on the Oregon coast looking at a big rock covered in bird shit. Where are we at? Who am I talking to?
Well, you're talking to Lee Chambers. My family's had a house here in Pacific City for 103 years.
103 years.
And a long time ago, my dad took me up that rock when I was, I think, 10.
Okay.
And during the war, that rock was used as bombing practice. And when my dad first went up there by himself, right after the war, it was covered with bombs.
Yeah, a bunch of unexploded ones, probably.
No, they're little cast iron things. And they had a shotgun shell in them and a hollow tube up the back. We got one up at the house. And when it would hit, it would set off the shotgun tube and set out a puff of smoke, so they knew they got a hit.
Okay.
That's how they knew. And there were bombs all over up there then, and they're very small, just little practice things. And they're all gone now. There isn't a single one up there. They rusted out. God, so fast. Even ours, which he saved right after the war, is pretty rusty.
Yeah.
And they're gone. When he took me up there, I was looking all over for bombs, and there weren't any.
I was in North Carolina bear hunting last December, and we went over to the Maritime Museum at Bogue Inlet in Morehead City, or right next to Morehead City maybe. And they had a museum there where they'd been bringing up a lot of the stuff that they'd found from Queen Anne's Revenge, Blackbeard's ship that sunk there in the inlet, was scuttled there in the inlet. Mm-hmm. But they also had the facility inside the museum where they were restoring all of that stuff. And their process for stopping that electrolysis was very interesting. I wish I could speak more about how they actually did it, but it wasn't enough to just pull a cannon out of the water and spray it with some fresh water and stop it. Otherwise, it would continue to corrode like what you're talking about.
Yep.
But I think a lot of boys that don't grow up, I kind of thought the piracy looked pretty cool to me. And then seeing the actual munitions that they were using, I don't think it would be good.
It wouldn't be cool. No.
The one that had the biggest impact on me to look at was I didn't know where barbells had come from. You know, I thought that had always been a weightlifting thing, but it was actually 2 cannonballs that were welded together with a shaft in between that was built for taking out rigging and masts and things like that.
Sometimes a chain in between.
Sometimes a chain too.
Yep.
And I think about one of those coming anywhere near me would make me no longer want to be a pirate.
It wouldn't be that much fun. I think a lot of those preservation techniques that you're talking about were pioneered by the Vasa over in Sweden when they recovered the Vasa almost intact. But they had the same electrolysis issues with all the metal in the ship. And it isn't a matter of just spraying it, although they sprayed it for, I think, something like 30 years.
And that's where all the cannons were built, was in Sweden too.
Yeah.
So Sweden built. They were the only place in the world that could build the cannons, so they built them for whoever had money. And they sort of had this like neutrality stance, but also like, we're going to give all of you guns.
Have a nice day.
Let us know how it works out.
Yeah.
Jeff, how about you?
How about me? Like, where am I from?
Yeah, who are you? What are you about?
Well, we've had this house in Pacific City for about almost 25 years. I'm originally a Salem boy, so our family came to Oregon in 1848. Kind of came up the coast and ended up in the southern Willamette Valley, and then sort of migrated north into the Salem area.
So did they sail here, or?
No, they came overland.
Yeah, so that would have been the very beginning of the Oregon Trail.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and the reason I remember the date is I think the 49ers, they discovered gold in California. And true to family form, instead of taking a left where the gold is, my family went right, went north, and there's no gold, but
they
ended
grow
up here.
stuff.
Yeah.
Thank goodness, right?
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
And then I've been in Salem for at least 3 generations, and my great-grandfather had a music store in Salem. My grandfather worked for a bank in Salem. My dad was in the airline business, in the travel business in the Salem area for a number of years, and I spent a little bit of time doing that myself, and then kind of went into a few different industries after that. But I'm kind of thankful. In high school, I started drifting the Nestucca River, which is just right out the back door here, and kind of discovered Pacific City through floating the river. It's also how I met Lee, was over the gunnel of a drift boat.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I was
40 years ago, that's true.
Yeah, it has been 40 years.
It has been.
Yeah.
I
was working on a boat in my yard, and he wanders down the street and comes up on the other side of the boat and said, "Hi, I'm Lee Chambers, and I'm building the Dory to go float the Colorado just 3 doors down. Come on down and have a look."
Yeah.
So I built a boat from scratch.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I was doing, so I picked people's brains. Why is the seat here? Mm-hmm. Why isn't it 3 inches forward or 3 inches aft?
Sure.
What is the dynamics? How high off the bottom of the hole should the seat with my ass on it go?
Yeah.
Why are the oarlocks placed where they are? And I was building a boat from scratch out of fiberglass. I mean, I was
a glass dory.
A glass dory, and
which is a lot less common for river dories.
Well, yeah.
There's a weird distinction naming issue. In the Pacific Northwest, we refer to as a drift boat.
Yeah.
And the same boat, except decked, is referred to as a dory in the Colorado River country. Mm-hmm.
And in the snake and salmon and stuff like that too, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he's building, for want of a better term, a dory.
Yeah.
When in fact the stuff that we fish with out of here is a whole different design, but also called a dory. So
I'm building this out of fiberglass, which I've never worked with before, from scratch. I'm building this boat. I'm picking people's brains, and Jeff was my neighbor. He was half a block away, and we became friends. And I got him involved in the thing. Next thing you know, he went with my wife and I down to Colorado for a month, and took the boat down.
How'd you do?
Well, let's see. There's a kind of a mixed opinion about that. But did we flip on the first trip? Yeah. I think we went over in Crystal.
Yeah.
Crystal is the place to do it.
Yeah. Well, we went over in Crystal, and Jeff went out one side. I went out the other side. We swam ashore, and my wife just bobbed on down the river and went through rancid tuna. And the river just spit her out, and she got up on a rock. It was an interesting time. But the boat held up very well. It was completely hatched and decked in watertight compartments. And, let me turn this off.
The boat went 5 miles down the river upside down by itself.
Yeah, underwater.
Yeah.
But we found it, flipped it over, bailed it out, spent an interesting night at the next campsite rebuilding. The front hatch had been torn in half. And I had enough fiberglass and everything. I rebuilt the whole thing. We were on the river the next day.
We lost some gear and about 10 cases of beer.
But my best...
Oh, tragedy. Did you find it like eddied out as you went
but
down?
The best story is that one of the things we lost was a half a gallon of gin. And it was in a big bottle, and it left whenever the beer and the coat and everything. So 4 days later, I get up early, and I walk out into the river. I mean, it's dawn, and it's still dark where we are. You can see the sun starting to hit up there. And I walk out in the river, and I'm taking a leak. And something hits me in the leg, and I look down, and it is the intact bottle of gin in an eddy. It came around and hit me in the leg. We drank that gin. That was an amazing thing.
I mean, you about have to at that point.
Yes.
Yeah, it's meant to be.
So then we came back from that trip, and I rebuilt the boat, and we took it again in
1992.
92 was the next time we took it.
Yeah.
My first trip down there was 72 before they had permits or anything, and I was on a trip for 2 months. We just stayed down there and got resupplied at Phantom Ranch, and wow, that was a long one. And but it kind of sparked me. I knew I wanted to build a boat that was really designed to do that, to go underwater. Mm-hmm. And so I did. It's fun.
I guided whitewater on the Grand Ronde, snake and salmon for a long time. And I distinctively remember the first time I saw a Dory crew come down the salmon. And we were scouting the rapid, and, we're guiding clients, right? So we're in big rubber boats.
Yep.
And I saw this crew of gals come down in wooden dories that were all painted beautifully. They were double-ended.
Yep.
Very elegant boats. They all had sliding seats. And they slicked through those rapids without taking a drop anywhere, and it was like the river was wearing them.
Yeah.
Instead of me on a 24-foot gear boat with 36-inch tubes and 20-foot oars, and everybody was just fighting for their life against each other and slamming into those waves and kind of clubbing the river to death. It was just so graceful and elegant. It was a really incredible thing. And there is something about the way these boats have been built in Oregon that allows them to do that. And the eye that people have for how boats interact with water here in the Northwest is distinct from everywhere else in the world.
Is it?
In a lot of ways.
I grew up here, so I don't know. I grew up in a full boat. Are you familiar with the term full boat?
No.
It was a German craft, now called a Klepper craft.
Okay.
But it was called a full boat when they were originally built, and FOLBOT, and they are a rubberized canvas hull.
I have one.
With wooden dowels and wooden deals. Well, that's what I grew up in.
Yeah, I have an old Klepper that I think is from the 50s.
Yeah, I'm sure it did, although they're still making them.
Yeah.
And my dad had two of them, and he had a little motor for one of them. He had a sail for one of them. He had everything, and he loved it.
Crossed the Atlantic in those things.
Yeah.
They're
I'm surprised my father didn't.
They're really phenomenal. I had mine when I was stationed in North Carolina and paddled it out through the surf and tumbled it in the waves, and it stood up to all that, even though it was already 50 years old at the time.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty incredible boat. You want to be in a good headspace when you start assembling it, especially if
you get the two halves together, and then you join them right here and you push down.
Yeah.
And if you've done it right, it goes. Yeah. And it's perfect.
And if you haven't, then you have to go find somebody and some epoxy and start making it make sense again.
It's a different deal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I grew up in, and they would fit in 2 bags.
Yeah.
And
we were using it to paddle out shark baits in North Carolina.
really,
To get baits out past the breakers and drop them off. And then we were fishing for sharks off the beach, which was a great time. I'd started out swimming my baits out because I didn't have a boat or kayak or anything. And I'd catch bluefish and swim them out and drop them.
mm-hmm.
And one time I dropped a bait, and as soon as I turned around and started side stroking it back to the beach, I could see my rod was going. There was already a shark on it. I was like, dang it. So I wasn't like thinking about the shark. I was thinking I'm going to miss this fish, you know? So I hauled Bud over to the beach as quick as I could, set the hook, missed the fish, and reeled in. I still had half of a bluefish there that was kind of kicking around, and I thought, well, that's still a pretty good bait. And I swam it back out there and dropped it. And as soon as I dropped it, the rod went again, and I ended up getting back and getting the shark landed. But I was also like, man, if one of my Marines did something as stupid as this, I would light them on fire, you know? Like, I would be so mad if I saw one of my Marines do something this ridiculous. I was like, all right, I gotta figure out a kayak. Yeah.
But the Clipper and full boats that we're in are so much more stable than a canoe or any of the little fiberglass boats. I mean, it was stable.
Yeah.
You could get away with murder in it.
The Six Ranch Podcast is brought to you by Nick's Handmade Boots, a family-owned company in Spokane, Washington. For many of my listeners, you have waited and prepared all year for this. Whether your pursuit is with a rifle or a bow, early or late season, big game or birds, another hunting season is finally upon us. Nick's Boots and the Six Ranch want to wish you luck as you head out into the field. This season, I'm wearing the Nick's Boots Game Breakers beginning with the archery elk season. Having worn this boot throughout the summer around the Six Ranch, I continue to be impressed with how quiet the boot is. The rough-out leather laces, and 365 stitch-down construction create a simple boot that is supportive, durable, comfortable, and most importantly, quieter than most synthetic hunting boots. For 60 years, Nick's has been building work boots for wildland firefighters, tradespeople, hunters, and ranchers, as well as heritage styles for anyone who values quality footwear made in America. Visit nicksboots.com today to find your next pair of high-quality American-made work boots. Add a pair of boots and a work belt to your cart and use the code 6RANCH. That's the number 6 and the word ranch to receive the belt for free. So what's a dory? If we're here in Pacific City and talking about dories, what's a dory?
He owns the Dory.
Yeah, so they actually started out as double enders, much like what you saw on the Snake.
And they were
very
rowed
similar.
out. There was no motors involved.
A lot of them were two rowing positions, and so there was two guys, 4 oars, and one guy would be the steering guy, and the other guy's just horsepower.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they'd row them out to the rock and go fish.
Yeah.
And then same thing, they did row back through the surf.
And sometimes they'd row all the way up to Cape Lookout.
Oh yeah,
And how far are we talking here?
Well, it isn't so far, but you were going against the set of the ocean, so it was a long row up there, probably, 8?
It's 10 miles. Almost
10 miles.
Exactly from the rock.
And then you could fish along it because it sticks 2 miles out to sea, so there tends to be some good fishing around it. And then you could ease back without rowing. Mm-hmm. So you could get back here and then use your energy to get back in to the surf if you were lucky.
Yeah. And it wasn't foggy.
It was not easy.
Now there's a Norwegian lumber ship that wrecked out here at one time, right? Do you guys know this story?
I do not, no.
And a bunch of homes were built out of it?
No, I do not.
All right, I'm going to have to do some more research before I talk about it too much, but a family friend has a home that was built out of this ship, and basically it sailed out of British Columbia. It had some troubles near the mouth of the Columbia. They abandoned ship. It ghosted for a few days and then shipwrecked somewhere near here.
It's not the Peter Iredale.
No,
I
don't think
that
so.
wasn't a lumber ship, I don't think.
But it scattered lumber all over the beaches. And
well, that still happens.
And people built like a dozen homes out of it, and including some wood that came off of the ship itself. And a family friend has one of these homes that was built out of both the ship and its lumber. And he gave me a cleaver and a giant wooden mallet that came from that ship.
Well, that's wonderful,
cool
but
is
I
that?
never heard of it.
And
me neither. That's
I
awesome.
thought I'd heard most of the stories around here.
And I think it shows up at real low tide sometimes. But I also think it's somewhat north of here. Anyhow, I think about that mallet, and it was certainly used for hammering that cleaver through meat, but it also would have been about the right tool for slamming wedges into holes in a boat that were leaking. And I like to think that, somebody was slamming cloth or wool or something into holes in that ship with wedges until they're like, you know what, I don't even like this job. Yeah. They tossed it into the bilge.
Going ashore.
This is not a career for me.
Yeah. I honestly, I hadn't heard that, and I've heard a lot about wrecks.
Yeah. Well, I'll do
here.
some more research so I can speak about it better. But Dory's here in Pacific City. Kind of talk me through it.
So average dory is probably 20 to 22 feet long.
Okay.
They've got a bit of a rake in the bow, which is very similar to the dories that you were talking about, where they were double enders. They used to have a rake at both ends, so they curved up.
Rake, like something you'd use to scratch up leaves?
No, a curve in the bow.
angle.
Okay.
And
so they're lifted in the bow and in the stern.
yeah, and the lift in the stern kind of went away when the boats became square stern dories. So they got rid of the pointy end at the stern, and they became square enders.
And were they square-ended for power?
They were square-ended to put a motor on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they started out with wells inside. So instead of hanging a motor on the outside or the stern of the boat, they built a well or a hole in the boat that was elevated on all sides so water didn't come in, and they'd hang a outboard there. The boats are designed. The launch here is significantly different than everywhere else. Dories in Pacific City are launched through the surf.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got a dory on a trailer, you've got a launch rig, you drive down to the beach, and essentially you back that dory into the ocean, into the surf. You've got a man that'll turn the dory around to point it bow first into the surf. And so they'll hold the dory while either people get into it or the driver of the launch rig will park and then come back down, climb in the boat. And so every day that we launch here, you're launching through the surf.
Okay.
Some days there's no surf. Other days it's 5-6 foot kind of surf. So
sounds like timing is important.
Timing is very important. Engine starting is equally important.
Engine starting is number one on my list.
Yeah. Here's one of the rules that everybody learns eventually, and that is that you only launch in a surf that you're willing to row back through.
Yeah.
Because if you get offshore and your engine quits, somebody will give you a tow back to the edge of the surf if you've got to get there. But you've got to row this 20, 22-foot boat back through the surf.
Right.
And so that becomes sort of the yardstick by which you measure your days. If you're not willing to row through it, don't go out in it.
Yeah.
But they're very stable craft. They are very, very seaworthy.
They're flat bottom.
Yeah, it's a flat bottom boat, so
There's
you
no
choose your days.
chine.
Okay. Is there any kind of reverse chine on them or anything like that, or is it a square-edged chine?
It's square.
Well, the sterns are square. There's most of the dories built from the 70s on have a bit of an angle to the stern. And so if you're in a following sea, it will pick the boat up.
Yep.
And it's kind of a leftover design from when they were double enders.
Mm-hmm.
And it really makes a huge difference. It doesn't take much of an angle to help get that boat up when it is a following sea or you're coming in. The landing routine here, essentially you get offshore. Most guys essentially will take a look at the beach and say, okay, if you've got passengers, you agree on where you're going to land. We have a lot of hazards here coming in. A lot of surfers down there because it's a great place to surf. We've got people on the beach. I mean, it's dogs and kids and strollers and people playing on the beach and people walking on the beach, vehicles driving around which are launching or landing. And so you kind of pick a place and you have to stay between waves. So waves actually, it doesn't look like it, but they're moving pretty fast. And so you've got to stay on the back of the one in front of you. You don't want to jump off a 4 or 5 foot wave because the landing is bad. And then you slide this boat up on the beach. And the idea is that if you can get it to a place where you can put your trailer under it, then you're golden. If it doesn't get far enough onto hard sand, then you hook a rope on it and tow it a little further up into harder sand. The trailers here are sort of a special design where you essentially back the trailer underneath the boat. So the boat's sitting on hard sand, you back it underneath it. The trailer it's hinged in the middle, if you will, and so the rollers slide under the boat. It gets about halfway on, and you crank it up, and then hopefully you can get all this crap off the beach because
without killing a tourist.
Yeah, or getting stuck, which it happens all the time. Yeah. It's fluffy sand, but it's a bit of an adventure just to go fishing.
Yeah, it sounds like it, and I think timing with all things is important. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about Vietnam, and then we'll do a little mic swap here, and tap you out. So, what service branch were you in?
I was in the Army.
You're in the Army. Did you want to be in the Marine Corps and couldn't?
No, I was drafted. I was drafted, and when I got to my flight class of 250 people, I was the only draftee there. Everyone else had enlisted in the Army to go fly helicopters. And I just got drafted and took the test, and they said, we'll make you a helicopter pilot.
So had you gone through college?
I had about 6 quarters at that point. I had not gone through, but
okay. But you're in school.
I had done some, but then I'd been in the Merchant Marine before that. I was close to a Marine.
Well, you're close to one right now.
I know. I didn't want to go to school. I wanted to travel. My whole family are traveling people. They just every generation just travels. So I wanted to do that too, but I couldn't because there were no options when in 1965 when I graduated from high school. You were drafted or you were in college. There wasn't anything else. There was a little bit of gray area, which I found, which is if you were in the Merchant Marine, you were draft exempt while you were in the Merchant Marine.
Okay.
And my dad had spent World War II in the Merchant Marine, who happened to be friends with the now head of the Union in Portland, and he got me in.
Is this the Merchant Marine Academy in New York?
No. Just when you join the Merchant Marine, well, it was really weird during Vietnam. It was catch-22. You couldn't get in the Merchant Marine unless you could get a letter from a union saying they'd hire you. But you couldn't get a letter from the union saying they'd hire you unless you had a Z card. And you couldn't get a Z card unless they gave you one at Government Central. So, in essence, you couldn't get in.
Yeah.
But this union guy wrote me the magic letter that said he'd hire me, and I got on as the lowest paid man in the ship. I was a wiper. I was down in the engine room. I cleaned up engineers' messes. And I ended up, strangely enough, we were leaving from Seattle, and then we went to Japan, and then we went to the Philippines, and then we went to Vietnam and sat there for a month at Newport Docks in Saigon. And because I worked in the engine room and we weren't running engines, I had nothing to do. Mm-hmm. And I was getting paid double time just to be there. So I had a great time. I got to know a lot of the Vietnamese, and I even got into the food. And
so what year would this have been?
That was 1967.
Okay.
So then I come back and I start school again, but the draft board said, you had your shot. And they immediately drafted me.
Okay.
And I ended up at Fort Lewis, and I took all the tests, and I was in basic training, and I'd done 5 weeks of basic training, broke my leg. Pulled out of basic training and sat around for 2 months with a cast.
How'd you break your leg?
I came roaring out of the barracks like everyone else with weapon,
yeah,
backpack, boots.
Looking crispy.
Hit the ice.
Oh.
did one of these beautiful numbers. It was later described to me. Woo, 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 woo. Bang! I just broke it instantly. So the day they took the cast off, I walked back to the cadre, and as I walk up, the first sergeant leans out and said, "Hey, you idiot! You got orders for flight school,
Yeah, you suck at walking.
but you can't take them." And I said,
You're gonna
"What do
go
you
fly."
mean I can't take them?" And he said, "Well, you're on a medical profile. You can't stand, walk,
Yeah.
jump, that. And I said, "I want to talk to the CO." And the CO said, "Well, he'd love to get rid of me." He said, "You've maxed out all the tests. You've done fine." But he said, "There's one test that I can't pencil you through, no matter what. And that is the live fire exercise, where you get underneath the deal and they shoot live bullets over your head at night and set off bombs and stuff." He said, "Well, there's one of those happening tonight, though. I'm going to send you out there in the medic truck and you can watch." So I did. I went out in the medic truck. We drank coffee, watched these guys crawl under this stuff. Came back next day. I got on a plane all by myself. Private E, nothing. Never finished basic training or anything. Went to Fort Walters, Texas, and started flight school.
See, I love that. They identified that you could watch ground combat element do their thing from a safe place, and they thought, this guy's born to be a pilot.
I know. Well, it was weird, and it was amazing.
Are you regretting this yet?
No. I get to flight school, and I'm sitting there in the barracks all by myself because I got there early. And these 5 huge buses pull up outside, and they empty out all these guys, and they're all in military shit, and I'm just sitting in this barracks. It's about 105 out. It's Texas, for Christ's sake. And I'm watching these guys, and I'm thinking, well, what are they all doing? And they got harassed for 5 hours. They're sitting out in the hot sun doing push-ups, getting yelled at, and all that. I'm watching the whole thing. These are my future. So I was meant to be a helicopter pilot.
Oh, that's awesome.
And
so did you fly a Huey?
Yes, I did.
Great aircraft.
They're wonderful.
Continue to be.
I swear I could fly one today, and I have not touched the controls of. I've flown in a lot, but I have not touched the controls of a helicopter since April Fool's Day, 1971. That's the last time I touched one. And I did that illegally because I flew down to IVG Farben building in Frankfurt, out-processed from the Army, and then flew back as a civilian But that was the last time I flew.
I was talking with Greg about this on the way over. For me, it was palpable when the Vietnam-era pilots started to retire and get out of aviation. Like the feeling of aircraft changed, whether it was commercial aircraft, private aircraft. As your generation retired from flying commercially, it changed aviation forever.
I think it did.
And you were the best helicopter pilots that will ever exist.
I think that's true. And, when I was when I got to Vietnam, I, like everyone else, was a Peter pilot, a co-pilot for 3 months approximately. And then I was made an aircraft commander. And that rank is gone. They don't do it. They haven't used it since, people tell me, in the late 80s. They got rid of it. And being an aircraft commander is a different whole thing from being a pilot in charge. Aircraft commander, we can and did tell generals to have a nice day, but we aren't going to do that. We're going to do something over here.
Yeah.
And you had to.
Right.
Because it was your life and your crew and your decision. And you got up in the morning, and every single twitch of a muscle, the controls and your brain and 3 radios and an intercom and a colonel trying to tell you something in the back and a major yelling at you from the ground, all of that happens simultaneously.
Yeah.
And it pretty much all day. Even if you're bringing donut dollies or beer, or one time, 2,500-pound chunk of ice out to a fire base. And by the time we picked it up and got it slid in and kind of strapped in, and got out to this fire base. Most of it had melted all over us. So it was a kind of cool flight. It was fun, but
which is probably about 700 pounds over your load limit.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't even think in terms of load limits.
Sure.
All the
If
gunships were over max.
If it fits the ships.
They oh geez, I was a slick pilot. That was easy compared to being a gunny.
That radio piece that you're talking about, where you have your intercom and then 3 radio channels occurring simultaneously, that was the same thing in the tank.
Yeah.
And my experience as a tank commander and tank platoon commander is very similar in a lot of ways to what you're talking about. And the closest thing I can compare it to for people who haven't had that experience is you'll see it on superhero movies, like whether it's Superman or Batman, and where they can hear like all the voices simultaneously and have to somehow distill all of that traffic and understand it and be able to run a switch back and forth for who you're talking to.
Yep.
Even thinking back to having 4 conversations simultaneously and running a switch for who I was communicating with, that seems very overwhelming to me right now.
It is.
But once you get into it, you can actually do that while operating an incredibly complex machine. For me, if I stopped, doing stuff with the tank, it just kind of sat there. You stop doing stuff with a helicopter, and it's going to keep moving.
Hueys didn't have any provision for letting go of the controls. You were always, although I flew a lot with the stick between my legs and
sure, that's why they put it there.
And Hueys had an ashtray. I mean, think about that. That didn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
We had an ashtray on both sides, and we would just talk it through. And if you had a good co-pilot, and you could learn a lot. You could teach a little and learn a lot.
Yeah. I understand you got a special visit one time while you're in Vietnam.
I did. My folks came to visit me. And people who should know better have called bullshit, but all my friends that were in my unit got to spend 2 days with my mom and dad, so they know it happened. And you had to know my mom and dad. I mean, I told you we were a traveling family.
Uh-huh.
I didn't think a thing of it. My mother was an ex-Army nurse. She ran the emergency room at Salem General Hospital when I was a kid growing up. My dad was a salesman of the machinery that does everything to plywood and particle board and stuff, except actually lay up plywood. But everything else was part of the stuff that he sold. So he sold it all over the world. He would go down to Gabon and design 2 plywood plants or something. And so they went everywhere. And they were on a trip around the world, and they were going to Angkor Wat in Cambodia. But Angkor Wat had just been overrun by the Khmer Rouge. And so they were down in the hotel talking to the concierge and saying, well, where should we go next? And he said, well, why don't you go to Vietnam? It's a very pretty country. And they said, well, we know there's a war there because our son is there. And he said, well, go visit. So they did.
How did they know where you were?
Well, we'd been writing letters, believe it or not. And Dong Ba Tin is where I was stationed, was right across the bay from Cam Ranh Bay. It was on the inland side. And so my dad, they flew in on Air Vietnam, which was an airline. God help you if you got on it, but it was an airline. And they flew into Saigon. And my dad called me. And he said, how do we get to where you are? And I said, Dad, I don't have a clue how you get here. I couldn't figure out how he figured out how to talk on an Army radio. I mean, on a telephone.
Yeah.
But he found me. That was my father. And I said, but if you can get to Cam Ranh Bay, I'll have a sergeant show up with a Jeep and pull you over here. But I had to fly. I had to fly the whole time they were there. We were short on pilots, and I couldn't go get them. They were 150 miles away in Saigon. I could get away with a lot, but probably not that.
Yeah.
So I said, if you can get there, well, he went over, apparently, and went to the Air America desk, which was around, and said, we need to get to Cameron Bay. And I'm sure some specialist for spooks looked at this man and his wife. He's in a business suit. She's in a black cocktail dress. And said, I think this might be a spook.
Yeah.
So he put them on a Queen Air, and they flew all around Vietnam and ended up in Cameron Bay. And so the next day I was out flying, and I didn't have any idea what was going on. And about 4:30, I come in on final, and I look over, and here's my mom and dad just waving as I come into the heliport. And we spent 2 days. The second day, we had the Korean, I don't know what you'd call it, showgirls and band and Mustang Sally and the whole thing. We once a month we got a group into the officers club, so we had this group come in, and there was a little drinking, and then we all went to bed, and then we got mortared, and we only got mortared once a month.
Okay. That's how you know to change your calendar?
Yeah, exactly. But they timed it with, maybe they didn't even know about the Korean band. I don't know. But my folks were asleep in my hooch. My roommate and I had moved out. And I stayed in a room that had air conditioning. And somebody came in and said, mortars, mortars, and shook me. And I went, oh, okay. And I went back to sleep. I slept through the whole thing.
Yeah. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah. But about 3 a.m, after it all dies down, there's crap going on for a while, and then it all dies down. And I woke up about 3 a.m, and I thought, we're getting mortared, and my mom and dad are here. And I ran across the compound yelling, mother. Mm-hmm. And somebody was awake to hear it, because I got into my hooch, and I shook my mom and dad, are you okay? Are you okay? And they said, yes, God damn it, go to bed. So that story is still being told by my friends at various places. But the next day, I loaded my parents in the back of my Huey, and I flew them from Cameron Bay to Nha Trang, low level, never got higher than 3 feet off of Highway 1, all the way up there, doing pedal turns, and grinning like a Cheshire cat, because it was fun to turn around and look at my mom and dad, and they got 2 suitcases between their legs, and they're strapped in the middle. And then there's 2 machine guns sticking out the side. And there they were, just phew. And I dropped them off at Air America, and they talked somebody into another flight and went on around the world. They wrote interesting letters about that trip, though. It was fun.
That is one of the most amazing war stories I've ever heard in my life.
It is amazing. And so far, I published that story in the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association newsletter. I wrote it up. Finally, my sister said, you got to write that up.
Yeah.
So I did. And I said at the end, has anyone else had this experience of having your parents there? No one has ever had it. They've had colonels and generals who came over to visit their sons and daughters, well, mostly sons in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And the number one problem of my mother's visit, would you care to guess what it was? Finding her a bathroom.
Oh, yeah.
There are no ladies' Johns in Vietnam.
Yeah, I suppose not.
But we figured out, we would post guards and clear places out whenever she needed it. But
yeah,
it was fun.
I'm glad that my mom hadn't heard that story before.
She'd have been there, right?
She would have showed up in Srigazi, Afghanistan, and I would have been like, ugh.
Now it's fun.
Yeah, embarrassing.
No, it wasn't to me. My parents are gas. And all my friends, and all the pilots in our club, I treated them like the great folks they were. But interestingly enough, we shared our officers club with the 10th Battalion, Aviation Battalion, which is a lot of colonels and generals and stuff. They were over our unit, but they shared and not one of those colonels, generals, walked over and introduced themselves to my mother or father.
That's weird.
It is, but everyone thought they were spooks.
Oh, gotcha.
And if you're a spook, it isn't good for your career if you know spooks, I guess.
Yeah.
So they didn't do it. But all my friends had a great time.
Yeah. Well, sir, thank you very much for your service to our country. And
I had more fun than anyone has any right to have. I had the best job in Vietnam. I was the best ranked. Chief Warrant Officer is God.
Oh, yeah. Nobody knows what you do.
Nobody
where you
knows.
are,
They
who's in
can't
charge
touch
of you.
They don't.
You can dress however you want.
Exactly. You can go into enlisted,
haven't had a
NCO,
haircut since the previous
or
war.
Officers Club.
Yeah.
You can go anywhere.
Yeah.
My roommate in Vietnam, a guy named Jim Bankston from Minnesota, and still a close friend, became the first W5 when they created the rank.
Yep.
He was on the first set of orders as a W5, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, and that's godlike status. That means this guy knows more about this subject than any other human in the world.
And Jim pretty much does.
Yeah.
He, I lost a tail rotor once, and Jim was behind me.
Lost?
Well, it broke.
Okay.
And
that have anything to do with flying 3 feet from the ground?
No. We were up at 1,500 feet, and I was half asleep. We were coming home. And my co-pilot happened to be an aircraft commander, but he was flying as my co-pilot because we were short of co-pilots. His name's Gator Green, and he died last week, which is why I remembered it. But
sorry to hear that.
So, yeah, I am too, but he'd had a tough last 5 years. So, but Gator's flying. I'm listening to AFN, completely spaced out. I'm as close to asleep in a helicopter as you can get. And we're 15 minutes from home. Late in the afternoon, everything's fine. Bam, 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 and the whole helicopter goes like this in the air. And we're doing 90 knots, so it shouldn't be able to do that, but it did it. It went sideways. And Gator says, "You got it. You're up guard." And hands me everything. I'm just barely coming awake as this thing's coming unglued. And Jesus, that was a long 45 seconds to the ground. But
so what do? You can't auto-rotate without a tail rotor?
Well, you can, but what I ended up doing, I kept trying to input forward speed.
Okay.
More speed means more wind going past your aircraft, which means that tail can't move.
So the tail boom is trying to keep
the tail boom is trying to and the tail fin up there where.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get more speed, but every time I input some, it feels like it wants to turn turtle and go over.
Sure.
So I put some in, and I take some out, and I put some in, and I take some out, and finally I'm feeling defeated by the whole thing, so I bottom the collective and just put the nose straight down. And I am one of the few people that has seen 160 knots indicated in a Huey. The red line's 120, and we were at 160. And the windshield's going like this, and the chin bubbles are going like this. But it stabilized completely. And we came down, to say we came down fast is to put it somewhat understated. We were 1,500 feet, and I don't know. And it came out of that, and I just started pulling back. And we were staying straight. My fear is spinning, because if you spin, it throws your body out towards the bubble. You wrap yourself over the controls. You've essentially lost everything. You've got no ability to fly. So I don't want to spin. I'm scared to death, but I don't want to spin. And I also want to be real near the ground when I start spinning.
Right.
Because then I have less distance to fall. And it just came out of there so smooth. And there were rice paddies everywhere, and there was a dike. And for reasons I don't quite understand, but I think it was just sheer fear, I said, well, I'm just going to set it on the dike. And I did. And it sat down on the dike. And it kind of went like this for a minute, and then the dike collapsed, and I rolled upside down. And I thought, hell, I have now survived a tail rotor failure, and I'm going to drown because I'm underwater. My sides, I know. And so I get unbuckled, and I turn around, and the crew chief, he got unbuckled, and we swim up to the top, and our aircraft's on the side. So I climb up through the top of the cargo area, And I look out, and here's a whole bunch of Vietnamese with machine guns running towards me. And I thought, oh, shit.
Yeah. Out of the frying pan
Yeah,
into the fire.
I'm screwed. And then I realized that one of the guys running was a black Vietnamese. In other words, he was a black NCO. And they were a rough, puff force, and they'd seen me go down, and they were there. But what started that story is, I tell you, Jim Bankston, my roommate, happened to come out of POL behind me by about 5 minutes. And this all happened very, very quickly, but Jim was right there. He landed next to me almost as soon as I touched down.
Yeah.
And we were out of there.
So you're one of the reasons that we have the Helo Dunker as a training standard now.
The what?
The Helo Dunker. Do you know about that?
No, I don't know what the Helo Dunker is.
Well, it sounds like you do. You get inside a helicopter body and you strap in, and it spins you around a few times and then drops you upside down in the water. And you get to unbuckle.
Thank God they didn't do that to me.
And swim out of it. And everybody hates doing it. And I think we probably have to because of you.
Well, as a trooper, you'd have to. Yeah. But hell, where you were, there was no water.
There was a time. Yeah.
Okay.
So it kind of depends on the time of year. Those
Helo Dunker. That's a new one.
Yeah. Those water those wadis go all the way up into the Himalaya.
Yeah.
And in the springtime, there's tremendous flooding and some flash flooding that starts hundreds of miles away.
Sure.
And there was a tank in a previous deployment that got washed away trying to cross one of those wadis.
I can imagine.
Wow. Yeah.
I can imagine how that water comes down there.
Well, I think we're gonna switch gears. We're gonna bring Mike on here, and we're gonna talk about boats some more.
Good. Can I give these to Mike?
Absolutely.
And thank you.
Thank you, sir. Great stories.
Thank you.
Okay. What's your last name, Mike?
Mike Laverty, Laverty.
Are you a Doryman?
I am.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about Dories, and some. I want to hear some stories. So we talked about launching off the beach and coming back to the beach. Talked about what the boat is. About 22 feet long. What's the beam like?
It can vary.
Yeah.
I mean, it's getting bigger. I think I'm at 72 maybe.
Okay.
So
72 inches.
Yeah, but I mean, most aren't that big. Traditional, Jeff can answer.
Yeah, they started out much narrower, like 4 foot.
4 foot, yeah.
Yeah, and then mine's about a 5 and change-ish, and they are getting beamier.
Yeah.
And longer. I mean, they're getting to be bigger boats.
So what came first, the Dory or the Panga?
Good question.
Yeah.
Dories have been fishing out of here for 115 years. I don't know the Panga.
Yeah. Because that narrower beam with the big bow rake, that sounds very Panga-like.
It does, yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Which, I've got a love-hate relationship with those boats because they're very waterworthy, but I've never been in a wetter boat. You're taking waves everywhere you go and spray. They're just a really wet boat everywhere you're going, it feels like.
They are.
Yeah. How are the Dories for that?
It depends on which version you're in.
Yeah.
Generally, they're a fairly dry ride unless you've got a big crosswind.
Yeah.
And then it just doesn't matter.
Sure.
You're going to get hosed on one side or the other.
And do you have the ability to trim them at all?
You do. And you can trim fore and aft, and essentially you move people around if you're going to trim side to side.
Gotcha.
They are fairly touchy from that standpoint.
In a 22-foot boat, how many people are you seating plus the captain?
If it's just a sport boat, captain plus 4 people is plenty.
Yeah.
We've got a number of charters that go off the beach now, and they'll take six passengers. There'll be a captain and frequently a deckhand.
And is that a 26, 28-foot boat?
Oh, some of them are 20, 22-foot boats.
Really?
But
that's a lot of people in that space.
It looks like bowling pins.
Yeah.
They're just stacked in there.
Yeah.
It is.
That's uncomfortable. Yeah.
But they fish them. And for them, I mean, it's a really economical platform to use. And if they can get 6 people in there at $300 a whack,
sure,
and fish till noon,
yeah, twice a day some days.
Yeah.
All right. So why Dory's?
Well, good question. But I mean, back to you guys were talking about the Dory start. But I mean, my understanding was when they quit allowing netting in the river in the early 30s, that pushed them out over here to where they could launch.
Oh, okay.
And so
people just took their river boats and decided to head to the ocean with them.
Yeah, and then did some modification because they couldn't be where they were, right?
Yeah.
So, but why dory fishing? I mean, I got into it for a couple of reasons. One, my wife brought me to PC, even though I was familiar with PC growing up in Newport, but I had never dory fished. I'd done a lot of fishing, but never dory fished.
Mm-hmm.
And I quickly figured out that I was a long ways from Garibaldi and a fair amount from Depot Bay.
Yeah.
And that was pretty good.
You like that?
I like that. And so
dude, the rivalry in these coastal towns is blowing my mind.
well, it wasn't so much rivalry, although, Lincoln City is kind of the armpit of the world, but
everybody hates on Lincoln City.
It's
so from my perspective, coming from the eastern edge of Oregon, I've spent very little time over here on the coast, and I'm going to sound ignorant, but one part of the coast looks pretty similar to me to the next, and it's the towns kind of all seem to have the same kind of shops, and like you can buy your saltwater taffy here or your seashell wind chime over here, and when we were at the fish cleaning station last night in Newport, we were asking about how long it was going to take to get up here to Pacific City, and this 100,000-year-old woman who was cutting up these tuna goes, "Well, you're going to have to go through 7 miles of hell." And I was like, "Well, that sounds bad. What are you talking about?" And she's like, "Lincoln City."
yeah.
Poor Lincoln City, just getting the wrath.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's well deserved.
It's
Yeah.
well deserved.
They earned it.
They don't fight it too much. I mean,
Yeah.
they go with it.
Okay, all right. Okay, so it's a different kind of boat. You launch off the beach, but I'm still trying to figure out why you would do that rather than in something that's more modern and conventional.
I mean, I think there's a challenge aspect to it. It's more of a kind of a pucker factor for sure.
Yeah,
For
for launch and landing.
Launch and
primarily.
landing, but you have, you had less fishermen.
Yeah.
Less people too. So
Yeah.
those two attractions were.
So
one thing.
the tradition is important as well.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, respect the tradition and figuring out how to do it and go through your learning curve of being stuck and breaking stuff and
Yeah.
crashing. And
Is there a dozer around for when people get stuck on the beach?
we wish.
Yeah.
They can't get there fast enough.
Yeah.
Because everybody's filming you nowadays, so it doesn't take long to get harassed. But
Yeah.
But everybody. Well, that's one thing about here. Everybody chips in to help people. You don't sit there long.
Right.
Yeah, which is really cool.
Yeah.
It is a really unique thing about this particular fishery. I think in 115 years of tracking it, we've lost 3 fishermen here that have been either lost at sea or passed away out at sea.
That's very safe.
Yes,
It is
one of
very
the safest.
safe. And the other part is that if you have a problem out here, you can get on a radio and the closest dory will show up.
Yeah.
You may have never met him in your life.
Right.
We will go tuna fishing and end up 50 miles offshore, and there'll be a bunch of dories out there, and if somebody needs to get towed home, somebody's going to tow you home.
Yeah.
It's get all of the people home safe.
Right.
That's it. And everybody here has a huge amount of respect for that rule, if you will. Just get the humans home safely.
It's much the same in Hell's Canyon with the jet boats.
Yeah.
Because there's no cell service, there's no roads, there's no sea tow, there's no Coast Guard. So if something happens, like you have an obligation and an obligation that you feel good about to lend whatever assistance you need. The main difference in Hell's is that you have the rafting element as well, and especially the newer rafters really hate jet boats, right? They're loud. They don't care about gravity. They hate the jets until they, get a hangnail, and then they're, waving their arms on the beach like help,
Yeah.
right? Which again, the jets are, happy to help with. But I really love that about especially remote waterways. If you're talking about an inland lake or something, that environment isn't really there. But if you're talking about the ocean, talking about a remote river canyon, people are really there to have each other's backs.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's similar. You got your friend Jimmy who, his motor may not have been running very good the last week, and you're like, nobody wants to go out there 30 then turn around because,
right,
he wasn't ready or wasn't running a top lick. So we, there is some vetting sometimes before before we head out.
Yeah. How are these Dories powered today?
Most of them with 4 strokes of anywhere from 70 horse to 150s, depending on the size of the boat.
Okay, so relatively light power.
Relatively light.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much to move a flat boat, as you know.
Right.
And so not a whole lot.
And then how many gallons of fuel will you have on board?
If you're fishing near shore, you'll burn 6 gallons of fuel, maybe. I mean, if you drive, as we talked about earlier, up to, say, Lookout or down to Cascade Head, it's a 10-mile jaunt. You might burn 7 or 8 gallons. So everybody's
very efficient.
Very efficient.
That's another good reason.
Yeah. They're pretty light boats. I mean, 3,000 pounds, maybe 3,500 or something if they're loaded. So it's a very efficient boat to run around in. If you get crappy weather, the mileage goes down significantly because they are flat and you can't go fast and you're just grinding through stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the average right now is probably about 115 horse, unless they're bigger boats like Mike's is a bit bigger, but that's plenty of horsepower.
I burned twice as much gas as he did last tuna trip, so I was like, what?
Yeah.
Type of thing.
Yeah, we ran out yesterday and had 2 200s on the back of a boat, and a 100-mile round trip just of getting there and back, plus all the putting around during the day. Go through a lot of gas.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of speed did you get out of that boat yesterday?
On the way out, we were doing 23 miles an hour to start with, and then we kind of hit some rougher water and had to slug it back down to 12. On the way in, we were doing over 30.
Wow.
And it had laid down a lot in the afternoon. Of course, it's following seas on the way back in.
Right.
And that boat is 26 feet, and it doesn't have much of a V in it, so it rides the backside of the waves really nicely. Doesn't heel into them at all. Doesn't bow down into them at all. So we were able to really cruise on the way back in. We got back in an hour and a half.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everybody was ready for that too. So after a day of diving for albacore, trolling, and then kind of getting beat up on the way out there, it was nice to be able to just scoot and get back home.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. How fast do you guys run?
On a good ocean, it's 20, maybe 25 miles an hour. I mean, it's got to be greasy flat.
Yeah.
But
which is plenty fast.
Oh yeah.
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 But if it's still if you're going 50 miles, it's a couple hours of standing there driving.
Sure.
While your buddies sit in the chair and back and sleep.
Yeah. Bean bags?
Yes.
I'm team bean bag for sure.
Walmart cheap bean bags that stink and go away at the end of the year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Folding chairs.
Folding chairs?
Yeah. I can't get those guys to be too comfortable back there.
Sure.
I got shit to do. They can't be sleeping.
What is the best eating fish here in the Oregon Pacific?
Lingcod for me, but I like it all. But lingcod's probably the family favorite.
Yeah, lingcod for me too.
Yeah,
and it is family favorite.
Yeah,
we get there's a variety of fish here. I mean, year round you can catch a few different varieties of sea bass. We've got lingcod. Halibut is a seasonal fish, and it's a couple miles offshore here, and you're in decent halibut country. We don't get giants, but it's a decent fishery.
The giants don't eat as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. For my money, if I'm going to eat a halibut, I want it to be a 30-pounder.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm not a huge halibut guy. I think halibut is for people who don't like fish. You know, it's the potato of fish. It tastes like what you put on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think I've heard you say that before.
And when people are like, "Oh, I love halibut," it's like, well, you love nothing. Like that tastes like nothing that has a nice texture. Yeah.
Yep. No, I would agree.
Yeah. But lingcod, I agree. That's good table fare.
Yeah, I call them. Lingcod's the new steelhead, is what I call it. So it pretty much is. I mean, but
and they're dragons. That's a scary fish.
Yes.
I want to spear one real bad.
Yeah, I'm surprised you haven't already.
I don't get out here to the coast that much. You know, again, talking with Greg about that because he was surprised. I can probably be from Enterprise to Hawaii quicker than I can be from Enterprise to here.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if we can get a salmon shark on the salmon, we can surely get a lingcod over there somewhere near you. Easily,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, the mystery continues with the Salmon River salmon shark.
Yeah, exactly.
I continue to hear all kinds of stories. People have different beliefs.
So,
yeah,
we were talking about this the other day. That knowing that you're just deep into the spearfishing thing, we've got a buddy that does some spearfishing here, and Cape Lookout. It's a big wall. I mean, it is a cool place to be, and apparently he's done some spearfishing up there. Yeah. It's a fellow Doryman.
Okay.
And I don't know, how deep is he spearfishing?
Not that deep. 30 feet probably.
Yeah.
Not very deep.
30 feet's nice.
Yeah.
Because it takes 10 seconds to dive 30 feet. So you're there really fast.
That's for you though, right?
No, just about anybody.
Okay.
Yep. So about 1 meter per second is a normal dive rate. And with the fins that you wear in free diving, that's just kind of what it ends up being. And whether you're new to the sport or old to the sport, that's just kind of a normal descent rate. But what's nice about 30 feet is that if you're weighted right, that's about where you become neutrally buoyant. So you don't have to fight to stay down there.
Got it.
So if you're less than that, that can be really appealing. Like, I only have to drop 15 feet to shoot a fish. Well, as soon as you get there, if you can't find something to hold on to keep you there, buoyancy's trying to pull you back up. Your fins are sticking up, and it's kind of tough. But at 30 feet, if you can just do those extra 5 kicks, then you can just kind of lay there and relax, and you can scratch on the reef or grunt or kick some sand up, and you can wait a few seconds for a fish to come and check you out and shoot him in the face.
Good on.
Yeah.
You guys are using, really long fins.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the advantage to that?
Well, it's a mechanical advantage. So the fin blades that I'm using are, the total fin is about 3 feet long.
Wow.
And I keep my legs as straight as I can, not as straight as I should, and kind of treat them like popsicle sticks. I'm mostly just kicking from the hips if I'm doing it right. And it takes very little movement for me to move a long ways. And think about the fish in the ocean, right? If you see a real long or broad fin on a fish, it's going to go faster than the ones that don't have much in the way of fin at all, right? Pufferfish isn't going to set any kind of speed records.
Right.
But if you look at the long sickles on a tuna or something like that, like they can really scoot and move. So it's just a mechanical advantage.
Makes sense.
The disadvantage is that you become a little bit less agile for turns. But, typically all you're doing is hinging over at the waist on the surface, dropping down until your fin blades are in the water, starting your kick cycle, do your descent, and then getting to the bottom, laying there, and just trying to not think dangerous thoughts because fish are pretty aware of that. And I've talked about this before, but I didn't believe it for the longest time. And my buddies from Hawaii would be like, "No, it's not like snorkeling. You're not just covered up in fish like the Little Mermaid. It's as soon as you load that spear gun, everything changes." And I was like, "That's such crap. Like, I can't believe you guys are saying that out loud." But here I am saying it too. And there's been times in water that I know has never, ever been spearfished, that I can be swimming along and there's just fish everywhere. I'm like, all right, this is a good place. I'm going to do a drop. And as soon as I pull back the shaft on that pole spear or load a spear gun, they just go, it's like a covey of quail. And they're so good at sensing when a predator is around. You know, they make their living knowing when they're in danger. And in the water, I'm confident that they can feel a heartbeat. I think they can feel when your heartbeat changes because it's making a physical pulse in the water. And I think that there's just something about fish that lets them know, like, hey, like this thing is now a danger. And as you spend more time underwater, you'll see things like sharks cruise past fish, and fish are completely comfortable and don't change their business at all. And then you'll see other times where a predator moves in and is actively hunting, and those fish hide. Like they just get out of there. They know the difference. I've also seen that with coyotes and deer, right? I've seen deer in fields where a coyote can cruise through hunting mice, and deer don't even pick their heads up. And I've seen times when a coyote comes into a field and all the deer run out the other side of it.
Wow.
So I think that it's in every prey animal to know when they're in trouble. And if they don't have that, they get eaten. You know, the dumb ones die first.
Kind of like a wily-eyed guy down here at Sporty's. Is that that type of thing?
Sure.
I get it, yeah.
And we have that sense too. Like, I think everybody's had the experience of seeing a person show up that's not acting right, and you haven't talked to them, you haven't communicated with them at all, but just by their body language, you're like, okay, there's something wrong with this one. I'm going to keep some distance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what does the season look like here? Do you fish all year long?
Some guys do.
Yeah.
I know, Mike, I don't know if you've done 12 months.
I've got 12 months in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's difficult, obviously, but
sure.
I mean,
Just
it's
cold.
Yeah, the cold aspect is okay, but it's it's worse than aluminum dory, but it's just when you can go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the weather just gets worse. Yeah.
And it's the surf that is the divider for us.
Right.
I mean, the ocean can be flat.
Y'all aren't afraid to get rained on.
No. We're all old steelhead fishermen, so rain, cold doesn't matter. But if the surf is bad, but I mean, you can see beautiful flat ocean, but if you got a big swell rolling in, you're just sitting on the beach looking at it.
Yeah.
So in February, it's cold, but boy, there's some nice days.
Mm-hmm.
And the fishing's great.
Yeah.
And from where we're sitting, you can see where we're fishing. I mean, you can go around the rock and go catch limits of bass and lingcod. So it's not far.
How's it crabbing?
Crabbing is seasonal. Right now, it's really good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can throw a pot out and end up with a limit, sometimes 2 in a pot. So it's excellent. And it's not far either. I mean, from here, again, you can probably see some crab floats out there.
How deep of water is that?
It's about 70 feet at that rock.
Okay.
And so depending on just on the other side of the surf, it's probably 40, maybe 45, something like that.
Probably the best Dungeness location there is.
Really?
Yeah, I think between,
Can you edit some of this?
Sure.
Yeah.
So
commercial fishing.
When you say best, you mean like the worst, like the place
yeah.
that people should not be coming to.
I was gonna preface it as to, the area from like off, down below, Hecate Head, down below, Cape Lookout up there. I mean, it's just the whole central coast as far as the sand and stops.
We were diving for them in north of Seattle last month, and it was so much fun. It was 40,
it's a blast,
50 feet of water. Yeah, we're grabbing them, and nice. They kind of juke you out down there, and you got to chase them around. And the guys I was with were diving with gauges, and they've got a lot more bottom time than I do, and they'd gauge their crabs out while they were down there. I would just get down, grab one, head to the top, and then realize it was female or it was too short or it was soft shell. It's like, nice. I think I picked up like 20 crabs, and I didn't get a single keeper, but it was so much fun. Yeah. My goodness, it was fun.
Yeah, they're fast, aren't they?
They are pretty fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you can get them, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He's going to
Yeah. I'm wearing big gloves, and I'm not afraid of them. One of my favorite things, though, living in North Carolina, was when friends would come out to visit, and they're used to dungees, and we'd catch blue crab. And blue crab are incredibly fast and very strong and will pinch you 7 times before you know what's going on. And the Oregon guys are used to big, slow dungees where they could just, like, pick him up, and if you reach for the back of a blue crab, he's just spin around and go chop, chop, chop.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I would never warn people about that. You know, that was good entertainment.
I'd be a victim.
Yeah.
I'd be a victim for sure.
Yeah, here,
And
watch
they're
this.
little, so people are like, "What? What's happening?" Yeah.
Great.
And they're a good eating crab, but I mean, it's pretty tough to beat a dungy.
Yeah.
We had one at a restaurant in Newport a couple nights ago. Gosh, it was just amazing. Such a treat, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Such a treat. Yeah. Looking forward to going home and canning some tuna, and I think I'm going to dry age some of it too.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know.
How do you dry age tuna?
I'm going to treat it just like venison.
Yeah.
I'll do an equilibrium brine, so I'll weigh it out and then add in salt and maybe some prog powder based on the weight, and put some herbs on it. I'll vacuum seal it for 10 days, 2 weeks, and then wrap it in cheesecloth and hang it up in my podcast studio until it's lost 60% of its weight, and then slice it up like prosciutto and see if it tastes good or if it kills me.
Are you going to do whole fish, or are you going to do
I'll probably just
gut and gill or whatever? Or
do a whole.
You can do some loins.
A whole loin, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we've got everything cut into loins right now.
Got it.
Yeah. And I think I'll pull a loin, pull one of the top loins off so it's got some less fat in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
But we were eating some of those Toro loins last night, raw at the cleaning station, and the fish cleaners were looking at me like I was a crazy person. But
Right.
man, that's good.
Really good.
Yeah, albacore's underrated.
It's
super
terribly
underrated.
Terribly.
And I think people have just eaten canned albacore from Safeway, and they think that that's what it is. And I mean, it's a real tuna, and it tastes wonderful.
It is.
Yep.
Yeah, very underrated.
Very much so. I agree.
Yeah. What is the earliest time that y'all remember people going for albacore here in Oregon?
For me, it would be, just after the 4th of July.
I mean, years,
Oh, years.
because it's not an old fishery.
Yeah. I can remember as a kid growing up in Newport, them bring them into the docks for sure when I was a kid.
Commercial guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. We know they've had canneries
Yeah.
for a long time, but that's the earliest time I can.
So my Dory was built in 1977.
Okay.
And I bought it from the second owner of that Dory, and it was a Dory set up for commercial fishing, mostly salmon, but I also inherited a whole bunch of tuna gear, a bunch of really old feathers and great old lures and stuff. And I would guess, just based on that it was in the 70s that boat was being fished. At that time, it was built with an inboard outboard.
Okay.
It was a Volvo.
As which most of them
Yeah.
had, right?
Yeah, there was a period of time when that was the ticket.
Totally.
And it very reliable setup. And for beach landing, it was somewhat bulletproof. They were just heavy duty outdrives, 270, 280 outdrives that you could just drive them up on the sand and they'd be fine. But I believe that boat was tuna fished shortly after it was built.
So in the 70s.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's still a young fishery.
Well, and that was commercial fished.
Yeah.
Sport fish, I don't think there was a huge sport fishing push until the internet. And then it just became this thing that just blew up.
Yeah.
There's a site, iFish site, that has got some guys that really started kind of in the Central Coast, Newport area, that started doing stuff. I think there was guys sport fishing, but not a lot.
Yeah.
And
It's a long run, and you've got to drive over the top of rockfish and halibut and salmon a lot of the year to get out there.
Mm-hmm.
And from a commercial standpoint, if you're guiding, like you don't drive over the top of fish that you could just kind of like stack into the boat for your clients and use less gas and make more money.
Right.
And there were no cell phones.
Right.
The electronics were marginal.
Sure.
It was a compass-driven fishery.
Yeah.
And particularly out of Pacific City, you want to hit this beach. You don't
Yeah.
want to just kind of end up on a beach somewhere.
Right.
So it was a whole different thing. I mean, coming here in the fog and you can't see the rock, you can't see the cape. It's really nice to have that screen with the little breadcrumbs that say there's home, but you turn that off. Holy crap.
I was running my jet boat up on the Kootenai River in northwest Montana.
Yeah.
We were trying to catch a state record rainbow trout, and because the previous record had been caught there. So we'd go out during the day and we'd scout these riffles and try and spot fish, and we'd guess where those fish were going to go out and hunt when it got dark. We'd run out at night and anchor, like 300 feet above them, and then walk, big lures back down into these runs. And we ended up catching some monster bull trout, but we did not get the big rainbows we were looking for. The first night out on the river, about 3 o'clock in the morning, super cold. It's January, right? Super, super cold. We're like, all right, we've had enough. And just as we went to start pulling anchor, we see fog roll off Lake Koocanusa and come over the dam like a horror novel. And it set down on that river. And I kicked on my lights, and it was just a wall of white, It's like, well, that's not going to work. So I go to my fish finder and look at my GPS, and I'm looking at the line that I'd set earlier that day, where I grounded the boat once.
Oh, man.
And I saw that spot, so I knew about it. But my line was also overlaid on a map, and in some places, my line was going over land. I was like, well, one of these two things is wrong. So do I trust the GPS line, or do I trust the map? Or do I stay out here until 10 o'clock in the morning when the sun comes back up while we're freezing to death? It's like, I'm just going to trust the line. And I had to be on plane because it's a jet boat and we're on a shallow river. So I'm going fast downstream, and it's not that big of a creek anyways.
Oh, my God.
So I just treated the little boat icon on my GPS like it was a video game and just watched that and throttled up, and down we went, and it worked fine. It was super scary,
I bet.
but it worked. So we just did it again the next 4 nights in a row, and it was fine. But, yeah, God bless modern electronics for stuff like that.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes scary shit is kind of fun.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
Watch your back.
yeah, trying to spear albacore with blue sharks cruising around and being way offshore and doing something that, just hadn't been done all that much. Yeah.
I'm still amazed that you guys did that. That's awesome.
I think it's going to happen more and more. I think that this is just the beginning of it. And as people start to figure it out and get on it a little bit better, it's a tremendous, tremendous opportunity for people to get out there in the water. You're not going to have to dive very deep. The water temperatures are relatively comfortable. It's relatively clear. The shark situation isn't that bad unless a great white or something like that shows up. And, there's a lot of fish. There's a lot of tuna out there. And if you can get on them when they're near the surface, and develop your own techniques for how to keep those fish there, it's a real opportunity. It's a real opportunity to have a heck of a good time with a spear gun.
So you guys spent, on average, a couple hours to get there.
Yep.
And then you got to find some fish in any quantity that you can get them boiling at the boat. And so you've got maybe 6 hours, and you said you did a bunch of learning.
Yeah.
What was working, what was not working. And so by the end of the day, you found some stuff that was working pretty good, and then it's time to drive home.
Right.
If you got another day and started with the techniques you ended with,
Yeah.
winner.
Totally. But also, like, at this stage, I've got a year to think about it.
Right.
Before I get a chance to go try this again.
Yeah.
And, we're going to war game this out in our minds a lot. And next year when we come back to try it again, it's going to be a totally different set of gear. We're going to go into it with what we learned this year. And you can never count on 2 days of weather to be able to do it. But, if we could do it back-to-back days, that'd be awesome. Because then you don't have to spend as much time the next day finding fish. If we could figure out how to spend a night out there and start first thing in the morning,
Right.
that'd be great. That would extend it a lot. But no, I think it's a pretty cool opportunity. And there's so much of this out there where, you don't have to go to some crazy exotic location to have a tremendous experience. You might just have to pioneer a new way to utilize the resources that are all around you.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So a year from now, plan on a couple more days to come here so we can get you out in a Dory.
I would love that.
It's
I would love
it's
that
a great
so much.
experience.
Yeah.
Great rush.
Yeah.
For sure.
And they're pretty boats. So much of what has happened, whether it's vehicles or really anything, we've lost a value of aesthetic. Modern rifles, I point a finger at a lot of times because they work wonderfully and they do things that guns couldn't do 20 years ago, but they're ugly as sin. And, if they do end up in people's wills, folks are going to look at that and be like, what in the space age is that?
Yeah.
Whereas, rifles that were built a century ago were gorgeous.
Right.
They're beautiful. And these Dories are an example of a really beautiful boat that's very efficient. It can do something off of the beach that nothing else can do. It can run 50 miles offshore. It can work inshore. And it's got a tremendous history that you guys are a part of. I think it's amazing.
It is an amazing fishery. The heritage here, I mean, it's like I said, it goes back over 100 years. The interesting part about the lines of the boats today, they haven't changed a lot.
Yeah.
And they're making some really great boats out of different materials. Mine happens to be a wood boat that's encased in fiberglass, so it's kind of two boats sandwiched together. Mike's boat is an aluminum boat, but it's got the same lines. So from a distance, you look on the horizon, and you see a Dory.
Right.
You may not know what it is. I mean, a lot of guys can recognize boats around here. They're making some boats. They made fiberglass boats also. There was some Harveys and Crowns that were fiberglass. There's a gentleman making some boats here that are also fiberglass. There's some carbon fiber. But if you look at them again at a distance, it's the same shape, and it's a very elegant boat, whether it's made out of wood, whether it's fiberglass, it's carbon, or aluminum. It's the same design that works so well that's just being recreated in different materials.
Right.
If folks want to experience this, is there a commercial outfit, an outfitter here that you guys endorse and trust?
Sure. There's lots of them.
Yeah?
There's
Name one.
Mark Lytle with Pacific City Fishing, I believe, is one. There's Oar Angling with Kyle Doyle. There's 15.
Josh Putnam.
Okay.
There's 15 guys here working that and all of them are really good.
Good. Yeah. Well, for folks who are interested in dory fishing, look these fellas up and book a trip and come out here and experience it. Yeah. And
Please do.
Yeah. Spend your money and go home.
And don't go through Lincoln City.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time and your stories. Appreciate you very much.
You
This
bet.
is
Thanks
beautiful
for having us.
Beautiful place to sit and do a podcast. Yeah, beautiful home.
Thank you for coming.
Bye, everybody. I just want to take a second and thank everyone who's written a review, who has sent mail, who has sent emails, who has sent messages. Your support is incredible. And I also love running into you at trade shows and events and just out on the hillside when we're hunting. I think that that's fantastic. I hope you guys keep adventuring as hard and as often as you can. Art for the Six Ranch podcast was created by John Chatelain and was digitized by Celia Harlander. Original music was written and performed by Justin Hay, and the Six Ranch podcast is now produced by Six Ranch Media. Thank you all so much for your continued support of the show, and I look forward to next week when we can bring you a brand new episode.